When I first heard two brothers murdered their rich parents for their inheritance, it got my attention long enough to read the headlines. I was fascinated for an instant, and that was about it. But there was far more going on behind closed doors that caused this dysfunctional family to evolve to an almost predictable, catastrophic end. The story of the Menendez family goes way back to the aristocratic lineage of their Cuban father, Jose Menendez. Jose came from a long line of family high achievers in which family members comprised of doctors, politicians, and Olympic-caliber athletes. As a young boy, Jose was defiant, spoiled, undisciplined, outspoken, and rebellious, and he was told he was superior by his mother. He bullied other children. When he was little more than an infant, he grew up self-centered and acted as though he didn't have to obey anyone, and acted like everybody had to obey him. In one incident, his family belonged to a country club in Havana, in which the proprietor had the 50-meter pool covered with an expensive wood platform to serve as a dance floor for the Christmas holidays. In 1954, Jose set fire to it. His parents had to pay $10,000 in damages, but his mother refused to allow his father to reprimand him.
But there were factors about some of his behavior in Cuba, his being expelled or sent out of schools and things like that.
His relatives shipped him off to the U.S. for fear he would wind up a political prisoner or worse because of his outspoken politics. Then they too defected one by one so as not to stir up any suspicion from the Castro government by requesting permission to visit relatives in the United States. Jose comes up Aquarius rising. Notice his ruler in the 4th conjunct the 5th. His chart compares with Desi Arnaz's chart, who also had Uranus in the 4th conjunct the 5th. Desi had to flee his home country, Cuba as well, because of the political atmosphere. Both Desi and Jose's Uranus planets are dignified or exalted, which meant going to another country was a step up for them. Wherever the ruler of the chart is, that's your first priority. In Jose's chart, Uranus and Saturn are both in or conjunct the 5th. Grooming and molding his boys were to be of paramount importance to him. But most important, notice Pluto on the 7th, heavily afflicted. His interactions with people were something of legend. He arrived in America at 16. He had to finish his high school education in a society of Anglos he resented. Feeling alienated, he knew how he was perceived. A second-class citizen is putting it mildly. For a proud, defiant young man to hold a lowly, humble station in society, his pent-up rancor only deepened. This is what gave him the drive to work harder, to study harder, to best and humiliate people unfortunate enough to cross paths with him. He started his lustful vengeance against an Anglo society by taking their beauty queen for a wife. Kitty Anderson was a student at Southern Illinois University in the radio and television department. She starred in campus plays, wore fiery red lipstick, and colored her hair in the early 60s. She was attractive, wild, romantic, and liked attention. She was popular with the boys and actually won a beauty contest, Miss Oak Lawn. She comes up Leo rising. Jose met Kitty when he was working as a crew member at the campus television station. Kitty lied on her driver's license about her birth date because in reality she was 3 years older than Jose, and he didn't know that. Much to the dismay of her friends, they couldn't believe she was dating Jose, what with all the jocks interested in her. We were so disappointed she fell in love with the Cuban who could not even speak English, a friend of hers claimed. Her friends didn't accept him. Kitty's family didn't accept him in the beginning, and during the boys' murder trials, her side of the family didn't attend. After they married, Kitty supported them both, taking a job as a third-grade school teacher. Jose went through life with a chip on his shoulder. His mantra was, "I don't care if you like me, but you will respect me." He is described as a hard worker, but tyrannical and mean-spirited to co-workers and subordinates alike. Brusque and vulgar, ruthless in his dealings, he learned berating, belittling, and humiliating people can cow them into submission, making them fall like dominoes. He learned how to read people and keep them under his thumb through the force of his personality. Unfortunately, this technique was to rub off on him as a father in dealing with his sons.
Jose Menendez is chairman of the board, president, and chief executive officer of Live Entertainment, joining us here in Los Angeles. And I should point out, this is the company, folks, that brings you the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video, which seriously is a hot video right now.
It is. So the company is broad-based and it provides pretty much what the consumer wants.
And you must have projections for down the road what you're expecting to make at some point.
So we think 1989 will be a tremendous year.
He was a financial manager that had the magic touch of turning failing companies around, but a lot of that was simply downsizing, which was very popular in the 80s. He simply looked at the books and cut out the fat and deadwood, bringing the company back into black. He was a shrewd negotiator, demanding top dollar for his salary. His favorite book was Og Mandino's The Greatest Salesman in the World. "I was not delivered unto this world in defeat, nor does failure course in my veins." It was Jose's Bible. By the time Lyle was born, Kitty quit work to be a stay-at-home mother. Jose could now afford to support his family by himself. As a mother, Kitty had much to be desired. One time, she was in a department store with 5-year-old Lyle and 2-year-old Eric. The boys got separated from Kitty and their aunt and were lost. Eventually, the PA system blared out, "They were at the mall information booth." Kitty said, "Oh, great, we know where they are, so we can keep shopping." 45 minutes later, she retrieved her sons. Others had similar stories that she didn't quite like her kids or show them much affection. Kitty told others on several occasions she sometimes wished she never had children. Children can drive a wedge between a husband and wife. They were so hard to handle, and they seemed to do things that would intentionally make you mad. Marta Cano, Jose's sister, was shocked one day when Kitty said she wished her children had never been born. According to Kitty, ever since Eric and Lyle arrived, her relationship with Jose had been destroyed. Later, when Jose started having affairs on her, she succumbed to alcoholism, prescription drugs, suicide notes, and wallowing in her misery. Lyle tried to make her understand he would have no problem if Kitty divorced his father and he and his brother came to live with her. But she wouldn't break away from Jose, which Lyle saw as being weak and pitiful.
You didn't respect her as a human being.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I loved my mother, and despite everything that had happened, when she was at her lowest point, I felt depressed. I was willing to basically separate from my dad, which would have been very hard for me, and side with her in a divorce and live with her. I mean, and it wasn't that I didn't respect my mother and I didn't love her. I felt very sorry for her, and she was very disturbed, and at times I was angry and confused and hurt, and we had a complicated relationship, but she was always my mother.
Others have said Kitty especially didn't like Lyle because his father spent so much time with him. Lyle was his golden boy, someone to groom and pass the baton to the next generation. Lyle was to be his greatest achievement. Jose was consumed by two things, his work and raising his sons right. And there was not much time left for Kitty.
Well, partly because of what I said before, he had his own dreams, and he wanted me to achieve those, and because I was the most important thing in his life. and what I did was serious.
Why were you the most important thing in his life?
I don't know, that's just the way it was.
Did it have something to do with your place in the family, or was your brother as important to him as you were?
No. My brother was unimportant.
How could you tell
He pretty
that?
much believed in, well, he did believe that the firstborn was the one that carried the line.
Lyle himself stated he never saw Kitty as a mother figure. Jose may have felt he was shortchanged by marrying Kitty. She did not tend to traditional housewife duties, such as caretaking the kids and keeping the house clean. They used a live-in maid. She allowed their pet ferrets to defecate all over the house. When Lyle would be running around in diapers that needed changing, Kitty had more important things to do. In Kitty's chart, with oppositions going along the 5th and 11th axis, children cramped her style, and with planets in the 10th, she'd be more fulfilled going after a career. She wanted to go into broadcasting or become an actress. With the fire sign Leo rising, she was not inclined to spend her life being a caretaker, as stated in the video, How Triplicities Interact with Their Children. According to Lyle, she did not even want to have kids, but Jose told her, no kids, no marriage.
She would say that I ruined her life, and she would explain to me why and how I ruined her life.
What would she tell you about why and how you ruined her life?
Well, if it was like, if she wasn't in a tantrum and she was just speaking normally, she would just explain all the things that she could have been, an actress, broadcasting. I learned about her aspirations with disappointments with not being a child actress and wanting to go on in some acting or broadcasting sense. And she told me that she had a job in New York to be a hostess at a restaurant, that she said she could make almost $50,000 a year, and that then suddenly she had gotten pregnant, that she had not wanted to get pregnant, that my dad had then forced her, well, gave her an ultimatum, either you leave or you stay home with my son and quit. And so she chose to stay home, and essentially her life was pretty much ruined from that point on. But
when the family moved to California, they were going to live in a 5-bedroom house with a tennis court in Calabasas. But Kitty thought the house should be renovated first. One renovation led to another, and they wound up buying a 7-bedroom, 9-bathroom house in Beverly Hills and living there. In the meantime, Kitty was preoccupied renovating the Calabasas house, which was now going on years. Paying on the mortgage and plowing ever more money into the house, Jose planned on selling it as soon as the renovations were done, which was close to being finished at the time of the murders.
Was he making close to $500,000 a year with all
No,
these perks?
he was supposed to be making more than that, but he had this huge amount of debt because of the problems with building the second house and the problems my mother had. My mother was so out of it that she was having problems with the contractors and so on, and the house was taking forever to build, and he was sinking a lot of money. So I remember that pretty much every dollar we spent was borrowed, and he paid interest on, partly because he wanted to defer his income.
For tax purposes?
Right, but he was, on paper, supposed to be making a lot of money.
Jose was nasty to the boys. Here's a picture of 2-year-old Eric and 5-year-old Lyle. Eric looks like a normal boy, happy, joyous to be with his father. Lyle has a blank expression on his face. To toughen him up, his father would punch him in the stomach and tell him not to cry. Frustrated from lack of expression, lack of protesting, and lack of crying out, he would numbly zone out. Notice the serious expression on his young face. During testifying, his demeanor was mature beyond his years. Tennis coaches have claimed both boys would inexplicably zone out at times during tennis practice. When the boys lost a tennis match, Jose would stay quiet until he could take them aside and berate them. When they won, he gave no congratulations and took them back to the court for more practice. They were never good enough. The Menendez brothers grew up never working a day in their lives. Their father wanted them to be tennis pros, and they diligently went about striving for that goal. As it turned out, they both rather liked playing tennis and had no problem putting in the practice time and taking lessons. Between the two of them, they brought in 60 tennis trophies, all first place, displayed in a floor-to-ceiling bookcase. They were ranked among the top 100 junior players in the nation. Perhaps because of the brothers' dedication to the sport, Kitty would do the boys' homework.
My dad didn't want to waste any time helping me with my homework. He just told her to do it. And then I go play tennis and practice and train or do my running or whatever.
So did she do your homework?
Yes.
When they were young, Kitty allowed the boys to run roughshod through the streets, on shopping trips, and in restaurants. She had a hands-off policy when it came to discipline. Lyle eventually took on an arrogance of superior breeding. One time he talked disrespectfully to a server, and when he was chastised, he said, "They're here to serve me." Jose, too, bragged about his two model sons, the way he spoiled them, giving in to their demands, denying them nothing. He would say, "If they are reckless, that's the way boys are." Nonetheless, as tolerant as Jose was about their rambunctious behavior, he was still critical, tyrannical, berating, and belittling to his sons, especially during tennis practice. One time, while sitting in the stands watching his son play, Jose was yelling obnoxiously at Lyle, making fun of him and generally being disruptive. Fed up with this embarrassing display, Lyle turned to his father and said, "Why don't you just shut up?" Jose grabbed the boy and took him to the back of his limousine. After punching Lyle in the face, he said, "Don't you ever embarrass me like that again, or I'll kill you." Quite hypocritical from a man who routinely humiliated people as if it was part of his job description.
And we were very nervous whenever my dad was around, especially my coach, because my dad was very aggressive. And I had sprained my ankle, and so I had an ankle problem still, and I was playing with it. And so I just wasn't running as fast, and my dad was ridiculing me and pushing me and saying, you know, "What a baby, look Brad, he can't run fast, look at him, look at him, oh poor baby, can't play tennis, can't run, his ankle hurts." He was doing that over and over and over. And then finally I was so embarrassed, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and I lost control, and I told my dad, "Why don't you just shut up?" And
Had you ever said anything like that to your dad before?
no, never. And my coach was just like this, and I looked at him, my dad. You couldn't believe the transformation of my dad. He just turned red, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He grabbed the ball, and he threw it at me, and the ball hit me.
Could you have stepped out of the way?
Yes.
Why didn't you?
I wanted the ball to hit me.
Why?
Because I had screwed up, and I was hoping. My dad he lost control there, and I wanted to just dissipate it. Maybe, you know, if he was going to throw a ball at me, I was going to make sure I got hit by the ball. So I got hit by the ball, and he told me to come over, and I kind of walked up to him, and he led me over to the back of the car.
How did he lead you over to the back of the car?
He just grabbed me by the arm and led me. Didn't drag me or anything, because my coach was right there. And he put me in the back of the car. As soon as I got in the back of the car, he just punched me straight in the face. And I went back against the window, and he grabbed my neck. He said, "Don't ever embarrass me like that again, or I'll kill you."
What did you do?
Well, I didn't do anything. I just sat there. I had blood all over my shirt.
I can't hear you. Move up. What I asked you what you did.
I was in shock. I didn't do anything. I nodded my head, and he tightened his grip on my neck, and he says, "Is that perfectly clear?" And I said, "Yes."
Did you ever talk back to him again?
No, I never talked back to him again.
As if they were a tag team, even Kitty would act like Jose when he wasn't there. According to Jose's sister, little things would set Kitty off, and she would get violent with the kids. She would pick them up by the arm and shake them and throw them and send them to their room. Frequently, she would call them idiot, stupid, or clumsy over inconsequential things. By 1988, a year before the murders, Eric was involved in home burglaries. 2 homes owned by the parents of Eric's friends were burglarized in July. In the first robbery, $40,000 worth of goods were stolen. In the second, $53,000. The last place he hit was the house of his best friend. The parents talked favorably of Eric and said he was a pleasure to have around. Eric had visited often and on occasion spent the night there. He knew the combination to the alarm system. Lyle was with Eric in the first robbery. Eric took sole responsibility for the second one. Eric's conscience bothered him and decided to return 2 high-priced necklaces, but did so to the wrong house. Eventually, the burglaries were tracked to the Menendez family. Eric had hidden the loot in a locker. Eric was arrested and booked and then immediately released into the custody of his embarrassed father. Lyle was not charged. The goods were recovered, but Jose still had to pay $12,000 for missing or broken items. The brothers were troublesome kids growing up and equally irresponsible adults. Lyle frequently drove on a suspended license.
I saw a similar form, I don't know if I saw this one, but at my Aunt Terry's house, about my license being suspended in May, and having to turn my license in.
May of what year?
89,
And what state is that from?
California.
Did you lose your license because of too many tickets?
Yes.
Eric lost his driver's license and couldn't be bothered to go down to the DMV and have another one issued. He didn't want to stand in a long line. A police officer told him he should have this taken care of, as he will continually be cited every time he's pulled over. Perhaps because Eric was so rich, he could afford to pay the citations. They relied too much on Jose's money and connections, and since neither worked a day in their lives, why start now? By college, it was clear Lyle was not rated high enough to make the tennis pros, and Eric didn't fare much better. Although the boys complained Jose was over-controlling in their lives, neither of them had any career aspirations of their own, except for tennis. Both of them had some vague notion of being in business with their father, but they didn't know exactly what. Lyle wanted his father to take him under his wing in business and be his first lieutenant. Eric expressed an interest to be in business with his father in some obscure way. What the boys really aspired to was to have a cushy lifestyle without having to work for it.
Why didn't you just cut yourself loose?
Again, my dad, I just didn't do that with my dad, and at least me, being his son, I wanted to be a part of his life. I loved him, I thought he loved me, and regardless of the past, I saw us together in life.
It fell upon Jose to figure out what they should do with their lives. Jose decided he would groom Lyle for a political career, and Eric would go into law. Looking at Lyle's chart, with the sun in Capricorn conjunct the 10th, well aspected, it's very possible Lyle could have made a successful politician. The trines indicate connections can help him achieve his goal, as well as having a natural affinity for the career. In testifying, he did very well to worm his way out of difficult questions. He has that political speak where he can smoothly give answers that pacify people or defend unpopular agendas using logical arguments. However, because he's been sentenced to life in prison, all that destiny cannot be carried out. This is true if you're in a coma or chained to someone's basement. If you don't have your freedom, you cannot carry out your destiny. And no, your destiny is not likely to be life in prison. You usually get there because of your own free will actions. Jose aggressively pushed for Lyle to get into Princeton because the college would give him prestigious credentials. Princeton, an Ivy League college, boasted Albert Einstein, Kurt Gödel, John von Neumann, Robert Oppenheimer as its alumni. Lyle's initial application was rejected. Although his grades were slightly above average, his tests unremarkable, Lyle had an athletic edge in tennis as the top-ranked player in the Middle U.S., and so the campus tennis coach recruited him. But Princeton is one of the most difficult colleges to graduate from, having nearly impossible academic standards. It often happens that successful, wealthy fathers, ambitious for their child to have every advantage to be ahead of his peer group, enters his child in a tough curriculum. Because these fathers have forgotten how grueling college could be or have never even been to college, they ultimately put their child in a competitive academic environment, setting him up for humiliating failure if he cannot make the grade. Jose himself would not likely have succeeded in graduating from Princeton, a college that rejected 59% of valedictorians' applications. In fact, Jose was a lackadaisical student at Southern Illinois University, where he got in on a swimming scholarship. It wasn't until he went to night school in Queens, majoring in economics and accounting, that he graduated in the upper 10% of his class. In any case, Lyle struggled. Lyle's poorly disciplined school habits didn't help any. At one point, Jose told him, "Forget about graduate school, just pass the classes." But in his sophomore year, Lyle was already getting an F in geology. He had also been suspended for 1 year for plagiarism when he was caught submitting someone else's lab as his own. Lyle also managed to find some worshipful lackey to do his homework for him, just as his mother had done before him.
Now, you said you had a deal worked out with him 6 months before. That was the deal regarding your future and your grades at Princeton, right? And
Right.
he decided you didn't have to go to graduate school.
Right.
You just had to get through and graduate.
Right.
Okay? And as far as that semester went, you didn't fulfill your part of the bargain, right?
I did.
Okay. So you had disappointed him, I would assume.
Yes.
Okay. And you knew you had disappointed him.
Yes.
And what did you think your prospects were for the fall of '89 at success at Princeton? In other words, did you think you could get it done that fall?
Yes. My grades the semester before were fine, and I knew I could pull my grades up if I just worked harder. And the professors at Princeton were very demanding. It's a very competitive school, and I basically badly misjudged what they expected from me, and so that's why I failed the course. And like I said, this wasn't a jock school. I mean, normally a jock would say, "Hey, I got practice, I can't make it." This wasn't a school you said that, and if you did, they just failed you. And it's close to what happened. I was constantly going back to California, I was missing things, and they didn't tolerate it, so that was going to have to be toned down, and Dad knew that.
Did you feel that you didn't have the intellectual ability to go to Princeton?
Basically.
Did you think you weren't smart enough?
I thought that was part of the problem. I thought I was smart enough to make it through the school. No problem, I could do that. But I was not on the level of most of these kids. I mean, this was definitely an incredible group of kids and hardworking, much more studious than I was. And, my mom had done, I kind of got there because Mom had been helping with homework. My dad wrote papers. Tennis was one of the reasons I got in. My dad forcefully negotiated me to get in. So, I was just barely there.
You must have felt uncomfortable.
It did.
Did it make you mad?
Mad?
At your father for forcing you to go to a place where you didn't feel you fit in?
No, I didn't feel he was forcing me. We made this arrangement. Originally, like I said, I wanted to go to University of Pennsylvania, but Princeton was kind of, if that's where he told me to go, that was fine.
In the meantime, when Eric was accepted at Berkeley, everyone was excited, especially Jose, because that's a prestigious college. But much to Jose's disappointment, Eric opted for UCLA instead because they had a better tennis program. Eric wanted to continue striving for a tennis career, which, by now, Jose was thoroughly against. Jose finally conceded his sons were Class A duds. Other than playing tennis, they were screw-ups. Jose must have been sorely disappointed at what sprang from his loins after having such an aristocratic heritage. He threw up his hands. What's the point of grooming his sons in politics or law when these professions were clearly out of the reach of his sons' capabilities? One day he told his brother-in-law, Brian Anderson, "I'm going to have a major discussion with Lyle. This reckless spending has got to stop." He told him that Lyle had to learn to support himself. He and Kitty were not going to pay his way forever.
And my sister Kitty began to recognize that they had essentially raised a playboy, and they took his credit cards away to try to educate him. He was really upset. And what he started to do was steal their credit cards and go out and buy what he wanted to buy anyway.
Eric was a disappointment in other ways, in whatever Joe thought would be the right way for a young man to behave.
I met Eric Menendez when I was doing a photo shoot in Beverly Hills. He was natural in front of the camera. He was very comfortable. I don't think Eric had really the physical attributes to be a working model, but he was photogenic.
In the meantime, the sons were frustrated at their father's impossibly high academic standards and his unreasonable, demanding expectations. So Jose, frustrated with his son's lack of ambition, decided to remove them from his will. Around May 1989, their parents' final year, Kitty told the boys their father was disinheriting them. She should know. She was typing up the updated will on a home computer. Jose had actually been threatening that for years, but this time he was really doing it. Perhaps that would light a fire under their rears to get them to try to make something of themselves. By removing his sons from the will, Jose signed his own death warrant. The gravy train was over. The brothers were hardly prepared for launching into life. There were never consequences for their irresponsibility. Jose always bailed them out, never getting reprimanded so they could change their reckless behavior. Kitty doing their homework undermined their education to solidify school lessons. Their parents teaching them passing someone else's work as your own is totally acceptable. All the time and money spent on tennis lessons proved fruitless. They were rendered dependent on Jose and impotent to support themselves from being on Easy Street. They figured Jose would always be in their lives, seeing them through, and after he dies, the inheritance taking over. Jose was now pulling the rug out from under. How would they survive?
During the course of the weeks and months that followed the murders of your parents, you also knew that you stood to inherit a great deal of money, correct?
That's eventually we were supposed to.
All right, because when you were living in Beverly Hills, you noticed that you lived in a rather nice place, right?
Yes.
And you knew that you lived better than most people in the world, correct?
Yes.
And you knew that materially that you were very well off. correct?
Materially, yes.
Okay. And I take it that you wanted to continue to enjoy the lifestyle that you had had before your parents were murdered.
I'm not sure what you mean. Afterwards?
Well,
I
yes.
wanted to continue that?
Yes.
Yes, we were, beyond that, we were very concerned that we would have nothing and no means at all. I wanted to be part of my dad's future and life. I felt that I needed him to keep me going, whether it be business or politics or whatever he wanted for me. You know, he was providing for me. There was a strong connection there, more than just material things also. And to that degree, you know, we were a family, and that was brought up that way, and I wasn't just going to leave. I mean, it's not just easy, and it's not something that I wanted.
On July 19th, a month before the murders, Kitty reported to her therapist she believed her sons were sociopaths. In the meantime, Jose told his sons, "You can kill me if you want to. You can do whatever you want, but don't think you'll get any money out of it." The parents had a sense of foreboding. It was all coming to a head in the final week. Kitty had started locking her bedroom door and had two .22 caliber rifles standing in the closet. She took the house keys away from the boys and told them to ring the doorbell to be let in. The parents were fearful for their lives. The idea to murder their parents was hatched only a few days before the actual killing. Lyle wanted to take time out to plan every detail right, but Eric wanted to move on it because he was afraid he'd lose his nerve later. August 20th, 1989, Lyle and Eric, armed with rifles, entered the living room and saw their parents asleep on the couch, lulled by the big screen TV showing The Spy Who Loved Me. Eric gives this version of what happened. The parents woke up right before the shooting. Kitty stood up, yelling at her sons, Jose getting up and saying no, and then falling back on the couch as they were gunned down. Lyle shot the father, Eric shot the mother, but Kitty was crawling on the ground trying to get away. They went back to the car, reloaded, and shot some more. Lyle gave the two killing shots, one to his father in the back of the head and one to his mother, pressing the rifle to her cheek. They got rid of the guns, drove to a cinema to buy a movie ticket as an alibi, came back and called 911. The police were so convinced the boys had nothing to do with the murders, they didn't even give them a gunshot residue test, which may have cleared things up right away. However, another witness testified she overheard the boys confess they changed their clothes and had taken a shower. Jose was so universally disliked, investigators didn't know where to begin. Co-workers in the company where Jose worked joked among themselves. Did you do it? It was truly a "who shot JR" moment. JR was a fictional character in the television series Dallas who had so many enemies anyone could have done it. The cops became suspicious a few weeks later when they heard of the boys' spending spree of hundreds of thousands of dollars from a life insurance policy. But the boys weren't done. They looked for a computer expert who could find Jose's updated will on the home computer. Whatever was found couldn't be opened, so Lyle said he was selling the computer and needed it scrubbed so that no personal data could be retrieved, ever. But in the end, the new will wasn't legal anyway. It had to be in document form, properly signed and witnessed. The boys were able to get their inheritance from the old will created when they were children. Everything was left to them. Lyle miscalculated how much his father's estate was worth. He thought it was on the order of $90 million. It turned out to be $14 million. And after delinquent taxes and debt was paid off, it whittled down to $4 million. Each son got $2 million apiece. The murders happened August 20th, 1989. By September, the police viewed them as suspects. In October, the police were able to break the case when a panicked Eric, tricked into believing the police were closing in, tried to contact Lyle as someone he could talk to. But failing that, he went to his psychiatrist and confessed to him that he and Lyle killed their parents. When Lyle found out, he was livid. How could Eric say something like that? He said now they're going to have to kill the psychiatrist and his associates. The psychiatrist deemed Lyle was nearly 100% a sociopath. That's not the first time Eric confessed to killing his parents to an outside party. Weeks after the murders, when a computer expert was tooling around with the family computer, Eric told Craig Signorelli, a close friend who was visiting, a few details about the shooting, including Lyle making the killing shots on both his parents. When the head detective requested Signorelli come down for a routine interview, he was flabbergasted with what Signorelli had to tell him. He had Signorelli wear a wire to get Eric's confession on tape, but this time Eric wasn't talking.
He said that he went back outside and his brother was standing there with 2 shotguns and said, "Let's do it." And they walked inside and Lyle was standing, or Eric went up to the door on the left, which was slightly open, and the door on the right, Lyle went up and put his shoulder against the door on the right, and Eric said he looked in and saw his parents sitting on the couch, and Lyle swung the door open and shot his father and looked at Eric and said, "Shoot, Mom," and Eric said he shot his mom as she was standing up and yelling.
The psychiatrist Jerome Oziel divulged what really happened from what the boys told him in court.
Well, he told me that it began with the plan to kill the parents actually began in a situation where Eric was watching a BBC television show or movie, I'm not sure which it was, that had to do with the theme of the person in the film killing their father. And at some point in the watching of it, Eric called Lyle in the room and shared with him what the content was of the movie. And as I recall, Eric said it began with sort of a casual conversation between the two of them. They started discussing what would happen or how it would be if the person who was a dominating force and a negative force and a very controlling person in their life wasn't there anymore. And at that point, it evolved into a discussion about killing the parents, most particularly the father first, and then the parents. And that's the way the actual discussion began.
Did Eric Menendez describe for you, in particular, what it was that he was upset with his father about?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
Well, basically that the father had just been completely dominating and controlling, was impossible to please, had perfectionistic standards, that he was controlling of a lot of different aspects of Eric and Lyle's life in a very extreme way, and also that he had been very controlling and very damaging to their mother, and that she also was miserable. So basically, they conceptualized the father. Eric told me that they saw the father as someone who was pretty much not possible to live with. That he was just an emotionally dominating, tyrannical person.
Notice when Oziel asked why they did it, among all the reasons they gave, not once did they mention sexual abuse or being in fear for their lives, that their parents were going to kill them, which was what their whole defense was based on. After months of trial, the jurors were deadlocked because of the sexual abuse claims. In general, the male jurors believed they were guilty, but the female jurors bought the sexual abuse defense and found them not guilty. There were heated arguments in their deliberation. The judge declared a mistrial. The boys' inheritance money ended up paying off lawyers for their defense. Leslie Abramson got $750,000 alone to defend Eric, and there was no more money for private lawyers for another trial. In the second trial, the judge refused to allow the sexual abuse defense, as there was no real proof of such claims before the defense lawyers got a hold of the case. The second trial found them guilty, and the brothers got life. All Kitty seemed to want was romance and attention from Jose. With Leo rising and her ruler in Libra and Venus in the fifth, that's all it took to make her a happy camper. She could do without the kids. Jose was caustic in his relationships, believing even a cordial attitude was soft. There were relatives who said he had a fun personality and was enjoyable company. He could charm anybody. But to coworkers, tennis coaches, and his kids, he was a bully. Jose was finally done in by his own sons. He turned into monsters because he himself had become a monster, and he suffered a monster's death.
Meet Lyle, who's been most everywhere, from New York town to Old Bel Air. But Eric's not as fancy-free, he spent his time in therapy. What a dangerous pair, but they're brothers. They're murdering brothers filled with hate. One pair of matching loonies trying to get Dad to stay. Where Lyle enjoys the outdoor sports, a Rolex watch, a brand new Porsche. Our Eric likes to spend his time in planning out the perfect crime. Now they're in the courts, still they're brothers. These murdering brothers love to kill. They own alike, they shoot alike, they plan to stand a loot alike. That's their special skill. When brothers get cut from the will.
That's all I got. See you in the next video.